The Polish composer Friedrich Chopin became famous not only for the beauty of his melodies, but also for the nostalgic nature of his musical message. In fact, his music is often considered melancholic. Take, for example, this excerpt that was supposed to be a cheerful Polish folk dance. Now, let's try to take a more clinical look at the situation. Chopin died of tuberculosis, a disease also called consumption. If not properly treated, it wastes away and consumes the patient until its fatal end. Chopin already had some pulmonary symptoms before he was 20. He was certainly already consumptive before he was 30 and died before he was 40. I would say that it would be strange if his music were not melancholic. In all areas of human creativity, there was an influence of creators' diseases on their creations, from the hallucinatory paintings of Van Gogh to the late works of the Brazilian greatest sculptor Antonio Francisco Lisboa. The Aleijadinho, by the way, a nickname that does not hide a series of dysfunctions. Well, in classical music it could not have been any different. Let us take, for example, the case of Robert Schumann, who suffered from what we now call nowadays bipolar disorder. He alternated between periods of overwhelming anxiety and moments of the deepest disillusionment, as, for example, in this passage where he sets to music the verses that say that, by the Rhine, he needed a very long, heavy coffin, because in it he had deposited all his pain. The truth is that the Romantic movement as a whole had always maintained a certain, let's say, proximity to ideals of suffering and death. The problem is that when a real illness enters into this equation, the prognosis becomes more bleak. After all, the patient wants to free himself from his suffering and hopelessness. On the banks of this same river, Schumann attempted to take his own life by throwing himself into the icy waters. In fact, a similar fate occurred about 3 decades later with his fellow professional, the Russian composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, another chronically distressed person, demonstrating the darkest aspect of mental illness, which is suicidal ideation. And his most famous student at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, Sergei Rachmaninoff, was another chronic dysthymic who put many dire thoughts into music. Mental illness aside, others had more organic reasons for their anguish, such as the young Franz Schubert. Schubert died of an illness that is absolutely commonplace today, but soon after he turned 30, he knew he was condemned to death. He ended up joining the ranks of those who left us too soon, such as the aforementioned Chopin, but also Bellini, Bizet, and the gifted boy Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. However, other composers reached what is now called old age, such as Bach, Handel, Haydn, Verdi, and Liszt. But don't think that they didn't suffer the hardships of old age comorbidities, or, as the WHO would like to call them, related to aging. In a phrase that in a way discusses the principles of homeostasis, Franz Liszt used to say, "For me, I have always found it much easier to die than to live." He tried to alleviate his physical and mental pain with high doses of spirits. In fact, alcoholism was very prevalent among composers, but no case was as dramatic as that of Modest Mussorgsky, who had a related dementia. The French composer Maurice Ravel also had dementia, but from other origins, which are still debated among experts today. Analyze the profound meaning from an anamnesis and neurological point of view of this phrase. I hear the music in my head, but I cannot put it on paper. Want another phrase? How about this one? O Lord, why did you give me such talent for music and deprive me of the pleasure of listening to it? Absolutely no composer had such an impactful influence of an illness on his work as the German Ludwig van Beethoven. It all started with a tinnitus in his left ear that progressed to his right ear, which evolved into 3 decades of inevitable deafness. His music became full of moments of profound sonic fury. Alternating with moments of profound resilience in the face of an intractable after effect. This movement of leaning in gave rise to the term too clinical, in the sense that not only did the doctor lean in to examine the patient at the bedside, but also in the more metaphorical sense of leaning over the pain of others. My name is Alexandra Bezerra. I am a doctor by profession and a musician in my spare time. I would like to invite you to take a curious stroll through the medical biographies of classical composers and evaluate what influences their illnesses may have had on their compositions, always on that fine line where music and medicine anastomose. Welcome to my channel, Music Pathology.